I was sitting at the small desk in my hotel room in downtown Phoenix when the first notification came through. The room was quiet. Too quiet for a man who still hadn't learned how to sleep alone. Just the low hum of the air conditioner and the muted glow of the desert evening pressing against the window. I had been reviewing a set of financial projections for the week, trying to convince myself that work still had structure, that my life still had ballast after my wife passed 18 months ago. The phone buzzed once, then again. The first alert didn't register at first. I saw the bank's logo and assumed it was another automated reminder about travel notices or account security. But the second buzz came too quickly, too sharp a rhythm to ignore. I reached for the phone with the same heaviness I'd been carrying for months. My checking account balance, $0. For a moment, I simply stared at the screen, waiting for the numbers to right themselves, as if the display were catching its breath. I refreshed the app twice. The same figures stared back at me. Then another alert blinked across the screen. Funds withdrawn and immediately transferred. I opened the transaction detail. The money hadn't just disappeared. It had gone directly to cover outstanding debts belonging to a familiar last name, Kylie's mother and brother, both of whom had always hovered on the edge of polite scarcity. Their financial issues spoken about only when they needed to borrow something from someone. I didn't have time to process the shock before the next message appeared. A separate notification, not from the bank this time, but from Kylie herself. A single line. "You're old anyway." There was no context, no softened lead-in, no explanation. Just those 3 words, sharp, dismissive, and disturbingly confident. For a long while, I sat motionless, the glow of the screen settling across the hotel linens like a thin layer of frost. I tried to gather the scattered pieces of thought, but everything slipped through my fingers. Grief and confusion have a way of turning a man's mind into fog, and mine had been drifting for months already. I stood, paced once across the carpet, then back again. My chest tightened. The air felt stale. Phoenix always smelled like sun-baked stone and far-off dust, but in that moment all I sensed was something sour, like betrayal had a scent of its own. I packed without thinking. I folded the shirts I had ironed earlier that morning, slid my laptop into the case, and left the hotel room before the panic could settle deeper. I didn't bother waiting for the elevator. I took the stairs one slow step at a time, feeling the weight of each footfall. By the time I reached the rental car, I had already booked the earliest flight back to Madison. I couldn't stay in that city another hour. On the plane, I couldn't bring myself to read, couldn't even manage to close my eyes. Every sound seemed amplified. The hiss of the vents, the soft clicks of seatbelts, the distant laughter of a pair of college kids 2 rows ahead. Life continued around me, oblivious. Meanwhile, a part of my own life was being rewritten without my consent. When I landed in Wisconsin, the cold hit me first. Sharp, honest, grounding. I drove straight to the bank, the sun still low, casting long gray bars across the pavement. I had known the manager, Josh Haynes, for nearly 12 years. He had always been the kind of man who chose his words carefully, the type who rarely looked startled. But that morning, when he stepped out of his office, he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on him before. Something between concern and disbelief. "Michael," he said quietly, "you need to see this." He led me into his office, closed the door, and printed out a stack of papers thick enough to make my pulse stumble. He placed the pages gently in front of me, as if handling something fragile. The first sheet showed what I already knew, the drain balance. But the next pages, new loans, my name, my address, my electronic signature, amounts I had never authorized, tied to accounts I had never opened. Each one dated over the past 6 months. All approved, all processed. My throat tightened as I continued flipping through the documents. The further I went, the clearer it became. This wasn't a sudden attack. It was a structure, pattern, something built quietly, layer by layer, while I was busy trying to stitch my life back together after losing my wife. Josh spoke softly, as if unsure whether I was ready to hear him. "These applications were made from your home IP address. And the identity verification. Michael, someone used documents with your name and birth date. Someone had access to things only a close relative would know. A chill crept through me. Not from the temperature, but from the realization that the circle of possible culprits was painfully small. For a moment the room felt dimmer, as if some curtain had been pulled over the world I thought I knew. Because this wasn't a mistake. And it wasn't an impulsive act. It was a long-planned strike. A betrayal that required time, preparation, and intimate knowledge. I sat back in the chair, the papers still in my hand, and felt a slow, unsettling shift deep in my chest. Not panic anymore, not confusion. Recognition. The kind a man feels when he finally admits to himself that something far darker has been growing behind him, quietly, while he wasn't looking. Something he should have seen sooner. On the drive home from the bank, the streets of Madison looked strangely foreign, as if I'd returned to a place I once knew but no longer belonged to. Snow still clung to the curbs in thin gray ridges, the kind that never fully melts until late March. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as I turned onto my street. My quiet street, my familiar street, but something in the air felt different now. When I stepped into the house, it felt staged. I don't mean tidy, I mean arranged. Organized in a way that didn't belong to my habits. A stack of mail placed too neatly on the kitchen counter. The thermostat set 2 degrees warmer than I ever set it. My reading glasses sitting on the coffee table instead of on the desk where I normally left them. Little things easily ignored on any other day. But today, after seeing those forged loan applications, the details felt pointed. Like faint fingerprints left by someone who assumed I wouldn't notice. And maybe they were right. Maybe for a long while, I hadn't noticed anything at all. I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. The one my wife made years ago in a pottery class she'd taken with her sister. I touched its rim carefully. Calmed me a little. She always had that effect, even now, quieting storms she never got to witness. But the house itself, I could feel the absence of her warmth more starkly than I had in months. I sat down slowly, running a hand across the armrest of the old leather chair she used to fall asleep in during movies. And as I sat there, the pieces of the past 3 years began settling into a shape I had refused to see. Rick, my son, hadn't drifted away suddenly. It had been slow, like fog rolling in across a shoreline, quiet and steady. At first it was small things. Canceled dinners. Holidays postponed for vague reasons involving Kylie's schedule. Calls that went straight to voicemail, returned hours or days later with apologies that sounded rehearsed. I remembered one Christmas 2 years ago. My granddaughter, Ella, had drawn a picture for me. A simple stick-figure family holding hands by a crooked little house. On the back, in her uneven handwriting, she'd written, "Love you, Papa." But Kylie had taken it back as they were leaving. "She wants to redraw it," she'd said. "She's embarrassed by this one." Ella had avoided my eyes that day. At the time, I told myself it was nothing. Children get shy, mothers have their own ways of managing things. But looking back now, I saw the truth clearly. The distance hadn't been accidental. It had been cultivated. And it wasn't just my son. Even neighbors who had once chatted with me about lawn maintenance or snowblowers had started giving me odd, sympathetic glances, as if they were thinking something they didn't want to say aloud. A woman 2 doors down had once asked gently, "Do you need help remembering the recycling schedule?" I'd laughed it off, but her eyes stayed cautious, uncertain. Rumors, then, whispers, a narrative someone had seeded long before today. I leaned back in the chair and exhaled slowly. My wife had tried to warn me once, quietly, in the way she always approached delicate matters. It had been during the fall before she passed. Her voice soft from the weight she'd already been carrying. "Michael," she'd said, "I worry Kylie sees opportunity in places she shouldn't." I'd brushed it aside. Told her she was tired, overthinking. Told her families have tensions that pass naturally. But my wife had known. She always read situations better than I did. Now the house around me felt too still, too curated. Not lived in, managed. I stood and walked into the hallway, glancing toward the partially open door of my wife's old sewing room. I hadn't set foot in there since the week after her funeral. I kept the door cracked, as if closing it entirely would seal away the last part of her. But now, standing there, I realized how controlled my own life had become. Dinners declined, visits reduced, conversations shortened, affection rationed, stories twisted, isolation disguised as inconvenience, distance disguised as busyness, disrespect disguised as oversight. And throughout it all, I gave grace where I should have looked closer. Behind everything, someone had been loosening the threads that tied me to the rest of the family. Subtle, patient, deliberate. Preparing me to be the man who wouldn't question a missing dollar, a misplaced document, an unexplained signature. Not forgotten. Moved aside. The truth settled heavily on my chest. I wasn't being ignored. I was being prepared. Prepared for removal. For replacement. For exploitation. I walked back to the living room window and looked out at the quiet street. Snow flurries drifted through the air under the porch light, soft and slow. And for the first time in a long while, I understood that something had been turning in the dark long before the bank account emptied. Something that had tied together the silences, the missing invitations, the strange looks, the controlled access to my granddaughter, the stories about my memory issues. This wasn't the beginning of anything. This was the middle, and I had finally arrived in the story too late to pretend otherwise. The next morning, I returned to the bank. I don't know why I felt compelled to go back so soon. Maybe it was the weight of the silence in my house. Maybe it was the uneasy sense that I hadn't yet reached the bottom of what had been done in my name. Josh met me in the lobby with the look of a man preparing to deliver news he wished someone else would give. He motioned me into a quiet office in the back, closed the door, and sat down across from me. "Michael, there's more." He slid a thin stack of papers across the table. I lifted the first page and saw lines of electronic signature logs, timestamps, device IDs, approval confirmations. Every signature was mine. Every signature was forged. $42,000, Josh said quietly. All tied to renovation loans attached to your rental property on Glenwood. My mind rummaged instinctively through old memories. Painting the porch railings there one summer, fixing the furnace during a brutal cold snap. I kept that house in good shape all my life. I'd never taken out a loan against it. I had never needed to. I turned the pages slowly, and each line felt like a handsaw drawn across bone. "I didn't sign any of this," I murmured. "I know," Josh said. He wasn't guessing. He had seen something. Something that made him certain. "There's more we found," he added, opening a second folder. "Something unusual attached to your online banking profile." He paused, as if giving me time to steady myself. For a moment, I thought he was going to tell me the account was locked, or that there had been more withdrawals. Instead, he showed me a small plastic bag with something metallic inside. A GPS tracker, found under my car. "Mechanic called us yesterday," Josh said. "He said someone placed this near your rear suspension. Looks like it's been there for months." The room tilted slightly. I brought a hand to my forehead, not from pain exactly, but from the pressure of too many truths arriving too quickly. Tracking my movements, using my home network, forging my documents. "Someone has been building a case that you're losing mental capacity," Josh added gently. "There have been inquiries into your retirement accounts, requests for early medical withdrawal. Whoever made them included a medical statement claiming cognitive decline." I looked up sharply. "A medical statement? From where?" "Some clinic in Minnesota," he said. "We checked. The doctor whose signature is on the form retired 8 years ago. A fake report. A fake clinic visit. A fake diagnosis." The metal taste of betrayal rose in the back of my throat. For a moment, the office went quiet except for the faint vibration of the HVAC vents. And then I heard the footsteps, hard, purposeful, coming down the hallway. Kylie. She swept into the room as if she owned the building, her coat half open, her phone raised like a badge. "I need immediate access to his accounts," she snapped at Josh. "I'm his legal guardian, and you people are delaying essential financial decisions. He shouldn't even be here alone." She didn't look at me when she said it. Not at first. But when she finally dropped her gaze toward mine, her expression didn't show fear. It showed certainty, confidence, as if this was merely the final step in a process she'd already rehearsed. "Kylie," I said softly, "where is Rick?" "Busy," she answered too quickly. "Stressed. He told me to handle things." Josh cleared his throat, his voice low and controlled. "Mrs. Bennett, we've reviewed the documentation you provided yesterday. There's no evidence supporting legal guardianship. You do not have any authority over Mr. Bennett's accounts." She blinked just once slowly, not surprised, annoyed, as if she hadn't expected resistance. Then something striking happened, something that told me more in a moment than the past 3 years had told me in their gradual erosion. Her eyes flicked, just briefly, toward the folder on the table. She recognized it. She knew exactly what had been uncovered. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, her tone suddenly smooth, almost practiced. "Michael has been confused lately. He forgets things. He misplaces paperwork. We're all trying to support him. You know how grief can." She reached out and placed a hand on my forearm, a gesture meant to look caring. Felt like shackles. I pulled my arm back slowly, calmly. "I'm not confused," I said. For the first time, her confidence cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but enough to reveal the steel beneath, the panic, the calculation. And then Josh added the final piece. "We also spoke with Rick this morning. He confirmed he never authorized guardianship. He wasn't aware you were pursuing it." The color drained from her face. It was the first time I'd seen genuine fear there. Not the feigned kind she used to manipulate sympathy, but the real, unmasked kind that appears when someone realizes the lie has outgrown their control. And yet, even then, she didn't apologize. She simply recalculated. "Kylie," I said quietly, "how long have you been planning this?" Silence. Not denial. Not outrage. Silence. Behind that silence was everything I needed to know. The forged documents were not impulsive. The rumors about my memory were not accidental. The tracker on my car was not incidental. The pressure on Rick had not been emotional immaturity. It was a structure, a framework, built piece by piece around my life until I stood alone with walls pressing in from every side. By the time security escorted her out of the bank, she was still arguing, still insisting, still demanding access. Her voice faded down the hallway like the echo of a storm moving farther away, but not gone. Not yet. As I gathered the documents and stepped out into the cold Wisconsin air, a single truth settled into my bones. This wasn't family tension, not misunderstanding, not conflict. It was exploitation, deliberate, organized, layered, and someone, my own son, had been under her control far longer than I realized. The wind stung my face as I walked toward my car, but for the first time in a long while, the cold felt clarifying. Because now I knew exactly what I was facing, and I knew I needed to move carefully, quietly, intelligently, the kind of fight that isn't fought with fists or fury, but with patience, precision, and truth. The kind of fight my wife had prepared me for long before she left this world. The house was colder than usual when I came home that evening. Not physically, just in the way silence can sometimes feel like an empty room watching you. I hung my coat on the hook by the door and stood there for a long moment, letting the weight of the day settle fully. My wife used to say that clarity never arrives with noise. It arrives in the quiet after. And that night, for the first time since all this began, something inside me finally stilled. The panic had worn itself out. The confusion had exhausted its own fuel. What remained was focus, measured, steady, certain. I walked upstairs to the small storage room at the back of the hallway, where the old safe sat beneath a stack of blankets I hadn't touched since the winter my wife got sick. The safe wasn't locked. She had insisted years ago that we keep it simple. For when age makes fools of us both, she had joked, long before illness proved her body more fragile than her humor. Inside were the documents of our life, insurance papers, the deed to the rental home, our marriage certificate, some faded photographs. But beneath those lay something I had forgotten, an envelope with her handwriting on the front. "If something feels wrong, M." Her writing was unmistakably hers, firm, careful, as though she always knew her words would outlive her. My hands were steady when I opened it. Inside were notes she had written over the last 2 years of her life. Dates, small observations, things she hadn't wanted to burden me with while she was fighting her own battle. Details I had dismissed at the time, thinking she was tired, thinking her illness made shadows look like monsters. She had recorded things like Kylie asking probing questions about our wills, Rick sounding unusually quiet after conversations with her, the neighbor mentioning concerns about my memory. Where did that come from? She had seen it forming, long before I did. At the bottom of the envelope was a final line she'd written in trembling handwriting, likely from her hospital bed. If you're reading this, it means you finally see it too. Don't fight with anger. Fight with preparation. Elliot knows everything. Elliot. The name felt like a soft knock on a door I had forgotten. He was the attorney my wife trusted more than anyone. A quiet, steady man she'd worked with during her own estate planning. He'd handled her medical directives, her living trust, work she'd insisted on doing privately so that I wouldn't feel burdened. I had never questioned it. I should have. I called him the next morning. He didn't sound surprised to hear from me. Your wife asked me to expect this call someday, he said, his tone warm, but heavy with the weight of something he had carried alone. She told me that if you ever reached out, it meant matters had escalated. We met in his office that afternoon, a narrow corner room above a small accounting firm in downtown Madison, the kind of place where nothing is rushed and nothing is wasted. He offered me coffee, waited until I sat down, and then pulled a thin folder from his desk drawer. She anticipated more than you realized, he said. Inside were documents she had prepared quietly, protective measures I didn't even know existed, a trust she had established in my name, financial safeguards, power of attorney contingencies that ensured no one could take control of my assets without strict legal verification. She told me, Elliot said gently, that she feared Kylie's influence over your son. She didn't want to alarm you before she had proof. And she didn't want you to feel paranoid after losing her. It made sense. My wife had always protected me in ways that looked like small kindnesses but carried larger intentions. Elliot unfolded another sheet, one that held a piece of information I hadn't expected. Kylie's financial history is complicated, he said, far more than you've been led to believe. He outlined a pattern of behavior stretching back to her early 20s. Loans taken under others' names, accounts opened then abandoned, legal disputes quietly settled by her mother. A trail of manipulation that had led her from one family to another, never staying long once the financial well dried up. And your son? I asked, my voice low. He's been financially cornered for years, Elliot said. She's kept him just stable enough to feel responsible, but just burdened enough not to question her decisions. Outside, the winter light shifted, thin and pale, like the sky itself had grown tired. I leaned back in the chair, the truth pressing against me but not crushing me. For the first time since this began, I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt prepared. Before leaving, Elliot handed me a small binder. Your wife planned for this. You're not entering this fight alone, Michael. She left you a blueprint. When I stepped back into the cold air, a flurry of snow dusted the sidewalk, swirling across my shoes in soft white spirals. I walked to my car with a sense of quiet purpose I hadn't felt in years. That evening, as I sat in the dim light of the dining room, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. It was Linda, Kylie's mother. Her voice trembled in a way that carried both shame and truth. I know what she's done, she said, and I think it's time someone finally held her accountable. I can help you, if you're willing to listen. Her timing wasn't coincidence. It was inevitability. Quietly, without announcement or anger, I began freezing accounts, locking access, moving assets into the trust my wife had created for me. One careful step at a time. Not loudly, not publicly, not confrontationally, just quietly rearranging the board while those who had undermined me believed they still had the upper hand. I worked through the night with calm, deliberate patience, the kind gifted to a man only after he's been broken once and refuses to be broken twice. By sunrise, I had taken back control of every part of my life. And none of them knew. Not Kylie. Not her family. Not even Rick. They still believed I was the old man in the way. They had no idea the ground beneath them had already begun to shift. The day of my granddaughter's small gathering arrived with a muted sky, one of those pale, winter-gray afternoons where everything feels suspended, waiting, as if the world itself understands that something quiet but irreversible is about to happen. I drove slowly, deliberately, letting the wind push gently against the side of the car. The neighborhood was familiar, but my heart moved differently now. Steadier, more certain. I wasn't walking into a fight. I was walking into clarity. When I stepped through the doorway, the warmth of the house felt manufactured, as though someone had set the thermostat high enough to hide the chill that lived beneath the surface. There were soft decorations on the walls, a small bowl of snacks on the counter, and the faint sound of children's laughter from the living room. But the moment Kylie saw me, the air shifted. Her smile tightened, her shoulders straightened, and her eyes flicked, not at me, but at the folder she had resting on the dining table. For a moment, she looked almost triumphant, as though she believed she still controlled the narrative. "Michael," she said in a voice dressed in sweet concern, "we just have a little paperwork to finish for your own protection. Nothing complicated. Just something to make things easier for everyone." She spoke loudly enough that the room could hear, painting a picture of responsibility, of care, of obligation. But beneath it, her confidence trembled. Subtly, almost imperceptibly, she placed the tablet in front of me, preloaded with a document granting her full financial authority. She tapped the screen with manicured certainty. "All you have to do is verify the e-signature. Just your thumbprint." She didn't notice the shift that had already entered the room. She didn't notice that her mother, Linda, had stepped closer, or that Rick lingered in the doorway, hands clasped tightly behind his back, silent, uncertain. She didn't notice Elliot and Josh approaching from the hallway, their expressions calm and collected, each holding their own stack of evidence. She didn't notice that every piece of the board she had arranged had already been quietly moved while she slept. She only saw me, the old man she thought was confused, the easy mark, the loose thread she believed she could pull without consequence. I drew a slow breath and looked at the tablet she'd placed before me. The screen blinked twice, requesting biometric confirmation. But when she tapped the final icon, a small error message appeared. "Access denied. Account frozen." She blinked, tapped again. Again the same message. A faint crease formed between her eyebrows, annoyance turning into confusion. What's wrong with this thing?" she muttered. And then Elliot stepped forward. "Nothing is wrong," he said quietly. "The accounts were frozen by Mr. Bennett last night, under legal counsel." She spun around, startled. "Who are you?" "I'm the attorney your mother-in-law trusted," he replied calmly. "And the one your husband's father still does." Josh Haynes set a sealed folder on the table beside her tablet. "Kylie," he said gently, "we've completed our internal investigation regarding the forged signatures, unauthorized withdrawals, falsified guardianship documentation, and the fraudulent medical report." Her face went pale. Not white, not shocked. Pale in the way someone turns when they realize the ground has vanished beneath them. "I don't know what you think you've found," she said stiffly. "This is all a misunderstanding. Michael has been struggling and Rick didn't authorize any of your actions," Elliot replied before she could continue. "He never filed for guardianship. He never approved access to his father's accounts. Everything you submitted was fabricated." Silence wrapped itself around the room. I could feel Rick's breath catch. I heard the faint scrape of his shoe against the hardwood floor. His world was rearranging in front of him, gently but undeniably. Linda took a slow step forward. Her voice cracked. "Kylie, I told you this would happen someday." Her daughter didn't look at her, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Neighbors who had been invited to the gathering stood with uneasy stillness. Even the children had fallen quiet, their laughter fading as they peeked around corners, sensing the tension adults try so desperately to hide. I said nothing. I simply stood there, hands resting calmly on the back of a dining chair, letting the truth speak for me, the same way my wife would have wanted. Elliot placed a final document on the table, a bound summary of every fraudulent act tied to her name. These findings will be submitted to the appropriate authorities by week's end, he said. You are welcome to obtain counsel. Kylie's knees bent slightly, as if her body didn't quite remember how to support her. She looked around the room for an ally. None stepped forward, not even Rick. He stood beside me now, not because I asked him to, and not because he understood everything yet, but because clarity once seen can't be unseen. His voice broke when he spoke. Dad, I didn't know. I nodded gently. I didn't need an apology. I only needed him to be free of her shadow. Kylie finally turned, searching once more for footing, for control. But there was nothing left to grasp. Every layer of her plan, every quiet manipulation, every forged document, every rumor, every step of the isolation she'd crafted, had been pulled into the light. Still, there were no raised voices, no dramatic outbursts, no chaos, just consequences. She gathered her purse with trembling hands and walked out the front door without speaking another word. Linda followed her, not out of loyalty, but out of resignation. The house grew still, softly still. Rick lowered his head, and my granddaughter slipped her small hand into mine, as though she had waited months to do so. I didn't say anything profound. I didn't need to. A man doesn't celebrate a moment like this. He simply breathes. Later, as I stepped outside into the cool dusk, a faint line of sunlight broke through the clouds and touched the treetops. A quiet victory, the kind that doesn't roar but restores. I stood there for a long time, letting the air settle around me, understanding that dignity rarely arrives with applause. Comes in the calm that follows truth, and the peace that follows reclaiming your own life.